action. Notice them, so let them go by. Focus on your breath. Present. And let's just take one more deep breath in. And hold it. And release.
Her computer.
And slowly open your eyes. Thank you, everyone, for being here in the room.
It's different on Zoom.
And online. So this is going to be happening.
Yeah.
This is the hybrid experience. So those of you online, please have some patience with us, and we're just experiencing similar things in the room.
Garrett, can you just mute that?
While we're doing that,
Top.
Oh, damn. Oh, yeah, mute. Muted. The computer.
okay. Well, can we let you guys work that out and then we're going to move forward? Or you guys need a moment?
Yeah.
Maybe the computer needs to be rotated by the keys. Hybrid meeting, we're having hybrid pain points. So for those of you, can everyone hear me online now? For Nicole, can you tell?
Try to log on.
Sharon said yes.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
You could speak up just a little, Jeff.
Okay, great. So, for those of you online, Nick is our go-to person. So please note his phone number and his email, just in case you need it. You might need it today. You're probably gonna need it. Okay, so we will be recording the entire meeting. What you say here is part of the public record. The recording will be made available for public review next week. To find more information about the project, please go to OregonTolling.org. And to our community members, we are grateful you are here. Thank you for rolling with all of our fun meeting logistics. You are always welcome to email your public comments to us at OregonTolling@ODOT.state.or.us. And please add your comments in the subject line. Let's go to our working together agreement. Do you need to pause again?
Microphone a little closer to you.
Okay.
Yep. Not gonna get too close to that.
Okay,
I'm gonna join, so they can hear me online, so that will help a little bit, right? It won't?
No, the audio, and then,
Okay. So let's talk about our working together agreement. Let's listen, believe, and reflect. Accept non-disclosure for the moment. Speak your own truth with compassion. Listen to understand, don't listen to respond. Value and celebrate each other's experiences. Open heart, like open mind, lead to exploration of possibilities. Make space, then take space, and be concise. Bring your best thinking into the room. Attack the problem, not the person. Agreement, frustration, and differences of opinion are acknowledged, explored, and addressed. So our plan for today is to discuss and reach committee-wide support on the Equity and Mobility Advisory Committee recommendations that will be communicated to the Oregon Transportation Commission at their July meeting. We'll also receive draft recommendations for the loan control report and explore your thoughts about them. We'll also receive an update on the community engagement work that has been done to date to understand what the public and specifically equity framework community has to say about the equitable tolling process and the loan control report. Listen to and discuss public feedback. What are people saying and thinking about tolling? And then we'll celebrate over 2 years of working together as an Equity and Mobility Advisory Committee. So for our plan today, to meet these objectives, here's our agenda. Welcome, and then we'll have an overview of where we've been and where we're headed. And then we'll talk about the EMAC July 2022 recommendations for the OTC and ODOT. We'll have a loan control report update. We'll have a community engagement update, and then we'll hear comments from the public, and we'll close. Let's talk about where we've been and where we're headed. So this slide speaks to the heart and purpose of this committee. What it illustrates is the connection between the Equity and Mobility Advisory Committee and the Oregon Transportation Commission, and their common first purpose, which is to advance equity with Oregon's toll program. The Equity and Mobility Advisory Committee is a group of individuals with professional and lived experience in equity and mobility. Their mission is to support the centering of equity with the toll program by advising the OTC and ODOT on how the toll program can benefit. Emphasis on benefit communities who have been historically or are currently underrepresented or underserved by transportation. Together, they are elevating and centering and advancing the goal of creating an equitable toll program. The Oregon Transportation Commission has specifically asked EMAC to provide input on strategies to address low-income impacts, neighborhood health and safety impacts, and multimodal transportation options. EMAC has spent the past 2 years plus identifying numerous policy and strategy options in these areas. Now that we have the context for why we are here, let's talk about what we did last meeting. So at the last meeting, we furthered our conversation around the part 1 of the committee's recommendations on accountability, toll rate setting, congestion management, and investing in disadvantaged minority and women-owned businesses and community-based organizations. So focused on the part 1. And as part of that conversation, we heard from an expert on toll revenue flow from ODOT about what that toll revenue flow looks like. And then we also heard from committee members and Commissioner Smith for the OTC and ODOT, all of which informed what we needed to work on for part 2, this stage of the recommendations that we're discussing today. We received an update on the loan control report, and we also listened to public feedback. That was last meeting. So what we want to do today is we've merged parts 1 and 2 of the recommendations. We're going to walk through each one of those recommended actions, discuss them, and take a vote. And we'll receive an update and discuss the loan control report, and we'll listen to public comment, and we'll also have an update from the community engagement work that's been happening. And then lastly, we'll celebrate 2 years plus work. So key milestone to keep in mind is that this is the last EMAC meeting it goes to the OTC in mid-July. So with that, let's have an update of the spring 2022 engagement results from Ann, present team. Ann is online, so we're going to switch over to Ann, who's going to join us on screen.
Hello, everyone.
Over to you, Anne.
Thank you. Can people in the room hear me?
Yeah, very well.
Yes, great. Hi, I'm Ann Presentine. I have come before this group before. Happy to be here again. I work for WSP and I lead the public engagement and communications for the consultant team. And with me, I have Sylvia Chabrowski, who will help me give part of this report. So this spring, we conducted multiple engagement opportunities on the congestion pricing concept, ways to advance equity, which included low-income toll benefits. And we're coming to you today to help aid your discussions as you finalize your recommendations. As a reminder, some members of this group helped us design the engagement questions. So we're wanting to close the feedback loop with you. The survey was received about 12,000 responses, which is a lot, and was open from late April through May 16th. And the map here shows the frequency of responses by zip code. There are some considerations that I'd like you to remember as we go through the data today. One, this was an opt-in survey. So the results are not statistically representative of the population as a whole. So there's some over and under representation. And while we asked different questions that we have in the past, the results have some similarities to what we saw in the past. In that respondents have lots of questions and concerns about tolling. And we also see that respondents are more likely to be okay with tolls if it pays for specific investments related to the highways or transportation in general. So I will go ahead and go to the next slide. This map shows the respondents who self-identified as having household income, annual income of less than $50,000 per year. And you can also see that communities of concern were well represented in the number of people who responded. Go to the next slide. Did we skip one? So go back one. Oh, okay, go ahead. Go forward. Just want to go through some overall themes. One.
You muted yourself. We can't hear.
Sorry about that. I just wanted to say that we can use a lot of different methods to get the word out, both in English and non-English, social media, email, and other methods. So in terms of overall themes that we've heard, one was keep tolls as low as possible. We heard this in multiple ways. There was little support for the nice to haves. We also heard to use a generous eligibility threshold for low income programs. There was more preference for using a rate that was 300% of the poverty level compared to 200%. And participants asked the team to consider impacts to working families and vulnerable groups that may not qualify as low income. For instance, families with kids who have to do a lot of shuttling of them to different activities, and in-home medical workers. And then we also heard that transit improvements are needed before it can be considered a viable alternative to driving. People said that investments were needed so that it would work for them a little bit better. Finally, the last bullet, there is both skepticism that community feedback will make a difference, and that also that tolling will help solve traffic problems. This gets to a lot of questions and concerns that we heard. Related to that, there was questions about why new revenue would be needed. And there's a strong interest in fairness as we implement the program. And finally, as we've reported before, some of these concerns that we've heard we've seen as other toll programs have gotten started, where there's a lot of thinking that it might not work. But then when the system gets turned on, people see that there are benefits to their time. I am going to turn over to Sylvia to discuss the results of our discussion groups.
Great, thank you, Anne. Yeah, just as a reminder, we held about 9 discussion groups with various BIPOC with BIPOC groups and youth and people with disabilities and community-based organizations. And many of these were held in different languages and got a really wide range of input. And so just some of the themes we heard, we asked questions that are relevant for the low income toll report. And, you know, we really heard some challenges about using the traditional income thresholds for eligibility for the low income discount because they don't take into account all factors, and just kind of that concern that the traditional definition of low income is not encompassing of all needs. So there were just questions about fairness and kind of desire to extend benefits to the working middle class families that might not typically qualify, but have very limited extra income. And we asked about support for various types of discounts, and there was good support for just ongoing discounts for low-income drivers, free transponders, and a cap on the daily or monthly toll amounts, as well as discounted trips per month. There was less support for transit credits, or just concerns that they might not be as useful for the fact that transit is not a viable alternative everywhere and that drivers may not be using transit. We also asked questions about just implementing the low income program and the application process, and folks just wanted the application process to be as easy as possible and allowing people to demonstrate eligibility through other programs like SNAP or through organizations that they already trust. We heard many times that signing up is a barrier in and of itself, so any way to kind of sign up in conjunction with other programs would be really useful. And there was a lot of support for using existing organizations, community-based organizations, and social service providers to really provide education about the low-income discount and how to apply and to assist with those applications. And there was also support for really offering payment options for unbanked individuals, which has been in consideration here. If we go to the next slide, I'll go over some of the discussion group themes related to equity. So we brought forward some of the pieces of the EMAC recommendations, and there was a lot of support for having an equity oversight committee, as well as frequent and regular reporting from ODOT on how this program is being accountable and addressing equity needs. And the participants in the discussion groups were also asked about what goals are most important to them. And the ones that they stated most frequently were really benefits for communities of concern, community health and safety, and kind of having enhanced transit, bike, and pedestrian choices. But there were questions about the logistical challenges of having alternatives to driving, and a lot of interest in prioritizing health and safety in nearby neighborhoods, and kind of that concern about diversion and clean air in neighborhoods if traffic would be rerouted there. Okay, next slide, and this is the last one on the discussion group themes. So on the equity strategies, there was, there were questions about equity strategies in the discussion groups, and folks really said that in terms of using transit and other options for travel, it's really important for ODOT to invest heavily in transit to give that real choice, an alternative to paying a toll. There were many comments about the interest in having ODOT really listen and build trust in the communities and demonstrate how they're addressing community concerns through the tolling. And we heard a bit that it's really not clear right now how the toll program is going to benefit the average consumer. So really, it's important to explain those benefits more clearly. And then lastly, in the discussion group we held with community-based organizations, they were asked if they would be supportive of a slightly higher toll rate if it meant increased investments in community identified priorities. And there was concern about that. And that's also echoed in some of the survey results that Anne is going to go over in just a minute here. So I'll turn it back over to you, Anne.
Okay, we just have a few more in the next slide. We asked who should be eligible for a low income discount or credit, and overall 55% of respondents preferred providing a low income discount or credit, while about a third picked neither. Respondents generally chose the higher threshold for eligibility, and this ratio held for all demographic groups, but the next slide specifically shows low income respondents. And so people who had self-identified as having that lower household income were more likely to select a threshold and less likely to select neither. Next slide. We asked, do you agree with the following options for a low income program? And overall respondents most frequently agreed with daily or monthly toll caps and toll credits or a free, a certain number of free trips per month as options for a low income toll program. And this was true across nearly all demographic groups. If you go to the next slide, there is a difference, though. You can see in the order. The transit credits for people who experience low income were seen as the least favored option, or got the least number of strongly or agree with doing that. Other options received agree or strongly agree more frequently. Next slide. We asked, is it important that toll?
Hey, Anne.
Yes.
Hi, Anne. Can we stop? We have a question, okay?
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Go ahead and mute, please.
So did we give them these categories, or were there open field? And you know what I mean? So it's like, here are your 3 or 4 choices. So people tend to go to those 3 or 4 choices, or was there an other, and are we missing that, other compelling ideas, I guess? It's just, these are convenient for me, but I wonder if there's other feedback.
So this was a closed-ended question. There was an I don't know available, and 6 to 9% said I don't know. Each of these was asked individually, though. Do you agree, strongly agree, or are disagree or strongly disagree with doing these? And so what you're seeing here is the net agree.
Thank you.
Okay. So we also asked about how important it was that tolling revenue contribute to the following, and it was similar where we weren't asking respondents to rank these or to choose. We were just asking if this was important to them. And safe travel was marked as important frequently by nearly all demographic groups, and these are the ones that they said it was important or very important. And climate mitigation and limiting rerouting also were selected quite frequently by all respondents. Respondents who identified as low income had slightly more interest in safe travel, community health and safety, and benefits to communities of concern, and less interest in limiting rerouting and congestion relief. And people of color who self-identified that way had slightly more community health and safety and benefits to communities. They ranked it slightly higher than all respondents, and relatively less less importance placed on limiting rerouting, climate mitigation, and bike and pedestrian facilities. One more slide. Oh, maybe 2 more here. We asked, would you support a slightly higher toll rate for community identified priorities such as improved sidewalks or transit facilities near the tolled highways? And I think the important thing to note here is slightly higher toll rate. And we saw that respondents were not very supportive of that, most respondents across demographic groups. And why is that? It gets back to the theme that we started with, that people, we believe, are wanting a toll as low as possible. It's also possible that the question wasn't specific enough, or that it wasn't focused on highways. So one more slide. We asked about use of revenue for non-highway improvements, and transit improvements was selected most frequently by respondents who selected one. But the most frequent answer was none of the above. And again, this could go back to people not seeing something that they agreed with, or that it wasn't related to a highway investment. And one more slide just talks about next steps. So later this month, we'll be sharing high-level summary of the results and publishing a draft of the low-income toll report, as you will be looking at. And then later this summer, we'll finalize and share the final engagement report. It is taking us quite a while to go through all of the open-ended comments that we received, because there was 8,400 of them. So we're reading all of those and we'll be summarizing them by theme. So that is all I have. I'll turn it back to you, Jessica.
Any questions for Anne or Sylvia? That was a great report. Really appreciate it, you guys. Any questions from our online members?
I have a question. It's maybe a question comment.
Okay. John has a question. Okay.
So I forget the beginning of the survey itself, but it feels like some of the responses came from a place of people thinking that there was a question if there was going to be a toll or not, right? So if you say, oh, none of the above, I don't want these things, so maybe you're not, that there's no need to justify a toll. Like, I keep coming back to the why of this. Like, it's not about if we're gonna have a toll, it's what can we mitigate, how do we mitigate that toll? But a lot of those questions, even at the last meeting, I kept thinking, these are weird responses, unless they think, hey, don't pay for any project, and that way it's only 25 cents a toll, or, you know what I mean? Like, they think it's somehow related. Some of the responses, especially from communities of concern or whatever, were kind of contrary to other things I've seen, and I think it was based on this idea that they thought maybe they could influence the decision around tolling, and or if you don't do infrastructure, maybe that'll keep the, like, you're almost justifying the need for a toll. And I wish I knew more about how we set up the survey and the why we put at the beginning of this, or how that was framed for any community groups or whatever, like, hey, if you don't want these projects, maybe we don't need a toll, as opposed to climate and congestion. So I don't know if there's any, if that came up at all.
Sylvia, did that come up in the discussion groups? You were more involved in that.
Yes, it absolutely did. And in the discussion groups, the initial framing really did kind of go back through the history of where tolling came from and some of the decisions that have already been made, and that there was public process that got us to this point. But that being said, of course, the folks in the room that were not aware of that public process or not part of it over the years, they wanted to start at the beginning of, why are we doing a toll at all, and wanting to provide that input. So I certainly hear you, and we certainly tried to frame it in the way, and that there has been a lot of thought already put into this and public process. But that being said, there was a lot of discussion on why are we doing tolling at all before getting into some of the how to do tolling moving forward.
I'll just say, I'll build on that. That kind of tracks with my history of working on planning projects with really divisive topics. Is that the first time you like, for example, I was working on a school planning master plan in Richmond, Virginia, where we had to close down schools. And so the first conversation into it is really going to be like, well, why are you even doing this? It's very kind of oppositional and upfront, and it's not until like you help break those barriers to where you can get to where, I think you're, John, talking more like constructive feedback and talking more towards like what it would be versus that initial like oppositional reaction. So the hope would be, like Sylvia and others go back to these discussion groups, we start building up relationships over time, and we can deepen that input. But that, to what your point you just made there, that kind of tracks with my history and how these conversations go kind of over time.
And when you read the public comments that we get, it's sort of like there's so many people that are really like, don't do this, and it's like, uh-oh. It's like, we're kind of past that event horizon, and it's really how.
Yeah.
Other comments, members? It's official. Thank you so much, Anne and Sylvia, for the update. It was great. And we're going to move on to our next topic. So, let's talk about the EMAC July 2022 recommendations for the OTC and ODOT. So as you can see, there are a lot of people that are going to contribute to this conversation, including the navigators. Let's just talk about how we're going to walk through these recommended actions. So for some context, the navigators have spent several months in subcommittee meetings leading the development of these recommendations. They've spent time in these meetings workshopping EMAC strategies while listening to input from the OTC and ODOT. So for each one of these recommended actions, we're going to have an EMAC navigator describe the journey of how we got to this recommended action. What were some of the pain points? What were the triumphs? And what has the process meant to you as an EMAC member coming to this recommended action? And then we'll hold a discussion, and EMAC committee members will contribute to it, as well as ODOT and Commissioner Smith representing OTC. And then after the discussion, we'll see if we have support on the table, and we'll take a vote for that recommended action. So that's kind of how we're going to walk through the recommended actions. And we've got speakers lined up to walk through each one of the recommended actions. So if we're comfortable with that flow, I'm going to pass it over to Michael to talk about recommended action number 1 around congestion management.
Hey, thank you. Michael Espinoza here. When we look at congestion management, a lot of our discussions initially started, with ODOT's intention to manage congestion and raise revenue for highway investments. And from a lot of our discussions, I think we really came to see this as an opportunity to address transportation more holistically. So we really talked about a multimodal system that gives people a lot of different transportation options. And so we really wanted to highlight this opportunity that when we think about the transportation system, we're really hoping to go beyond just the highways as a component of it, but look at travel corridors and understanding that thoughtfully planned travel corridors can help give people choices and also mean that people can move around in climate-friendly ways. And so we know that means reducing greenhouse gas emissions, improving safety, and then also really importantly, it means better air quality for people traveling along the corridor and living near it as well. So that's where a lot of our conversations, I think, really took place, and you'll probably see, I think that's probably what I would, describe as, some of our triumphs and pain points, because we're, I think, really looking to advocate for the highway system and the pieces of the transportation system that ODOT is managing to really think holistically about travel altogether. And so I think that's where we've seen a lot of progress, especially when we think about investing in options where people can take the bus or walk or bike, and it just really ties us back into that earlier vision that we were talking about in some of our early discussions, that tolling can be a tool to price the system to help drive towards those outcomes. That's kind of my, that's the summary page. And then, would you like me to read the
if
whole
you want to
thing?
read that out, that would be great.
Okay. So recommended action number 1 connects to foundational statements 1, 2, 3, and 7. The following goals should guide ODOT's decisions on tolling related to congestion management, including design, setting rates, monitoring, and adjusting tolls, with an emphasis on avoiding disproportionate burdens and focusing on benefits among equity framework communities. So we have priced the system to maximize efficiency of the toll corridors emphasizing moving as many people as possible in the existing lanes, coupled with robust investments by ODOT and regional partners in reliable, emissions-reducing, and a competitive range of transportation options. That's biking, walking, busing, carpooling, vanpooling, and et cetera, to advance climate, safety, and mobility. Limit freight and longer trips diverting into local communities. Improve access to jobs, healthcare services, education, recreation, and natural spaces. Improve air quality and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Reduce vehicle miles traveled, VMT per capita. Increase mode shift from single occupancy vehicles to higher occupancy vehicles or transit. And price the system so that lower income households pay a lower percentage of household income than middle and upper income households pay.
So Michael's kind of given us a summary of recommended action, number one, and he's also kind of just read the actual recommended action. So now let's just talk about this. What are your thoughts? Does this feel like this recommended action is go, or do you have some questions about it or concerns? This is your time, committee members, to really take a last look at this recommended action and see if there's any tweaks, any adjustments that you'd like to make before we pass it along to the Oregon Transportation Commission. We'll take comments from members first, and then we'll talk to Commissioner Smith and ODOT after that. Okay. Thoughts? Michael?
So I have some additional thoughts. Well, first off, I want to say that, we've discussed a lot about reducing vehicle miles traveled. And so it's just really great to see that captured in here. I think that really focuses a lot of our discussions, that ties to greenhouse gas emissions, but also safety on our roadways and just the volume of vehicles on it. When the miles traveled goes down, we see better safety outcomes and makes it more comfortable for other modes and people using other modes to get around.
Unknown caller.
So that's really great. And then, so there's one small thing up in the sort of preamble section up above the recommended actions, where we talk about, we recognize and support the definition of demand management as redesigning and operating the system to reduce congestion on the highways through tiered pricing and investments in transportation options, including the promotion of carpooling, vanpooling, and mass transit. And I think to some of the things I was mentioning before, I think to really get us to that holistic piece, I'm curious if we could pull out to reduce congestion on highways piece, and that way we can really keep it high level as recognizing, ODOT's influence on the transportation system and, its responsibility, to manage it for all of the, outcomes that we were talking about. That's a suggested edit there. Maybe I'll pause if anyone has support for that or other thoughts on it.
So you're asking for ODOT to take a greater role in reducing congestion on non-highways?
It would just be to remove the phrase to reduce congestion on the highway, and so that the statement would read, and operate this system, through tiered pricing and investment in transportation options. So it's kind of like pulling up one level, and so it's sort of recognizing that ODOT is, yes, looking after the highways, but connected to that broader network. I guess my hope with that edit, is to just, make it clear that I think a lot of what we're hoping for is not not always on the highway, but we are trying to create this, more equitable multimodal system. And so that's the piece that I'm trying to get at. And so I think that edit could be one way to get there, but maybe there's other thoughts.
I wonder if there's just a technicality in the sense that ODOT, I think, has jurisdiction over highways, but not over other
Other systems?
There's other roads that ODOT owns outside of the highway.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
so that would be, taking that, it would be consistent with that sort of broader jurisdiction.
And ODOT can fund a lot of different
Yeah.
transportation projects, if it was an ODOT system delivering that.
What if it said, no, we don't want to go down this road, but to reduce regional congestion through a tier? So it's still more of a,
Yeah.
because I think that's more
Yeah,
holistic,
yeah.
and ODOT knows what it has, right of way for and what it doesn't, and so does PBOT and all the others. But that's what we're coming.
I would, totally agree to that.
And also, Judge, with the language, in the first bullet there, full corridors that Michael, you were speaking to before.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. And then, thank you. The other piece I just wanted to, is more of a clarification from the group, but in that last bullet, we're talking about pricing the system so that lower income households pay a lower percentage of household income than middle and upper income households pay. And if I recall correctly, I think we were really focusing on that, progressiveness at the lower tier, that there would be like a discount from like a standard rate or an exemption from that standard rate. I guess I wanted to confirm, is that correct? And I've heard some other questions around, like, would that mean middle and upper income households, that there's more tiering at that end of the spectrum too? And that's not the way I read it, but I just wanted to check that with.
So, are you recommending to change it all, or just trying to get an understanding of?
Yeah, I think my understanding of the intent is that I wanted to confirm is that we are recommending that we have, these progressive rates or exemptions and discounts for low-income households. I just wanted to confirm that is
That's how I would read
correct.
that last bullet.
Okay.
That's how I'd read that.
Okay.
So we're confirming that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, good. No, so no change to that then?
No change, yeah.
Any other thoughts, Mike?
That's
How about other members?
Hard to beat Michael.
And are there any other members online that have thoughts about recommended action number 1? Please go ahead and unmute yourself. Hearing none, I'm going to move to ODOT. And actually, Commissioner Smith, why don't we start with you, and then we'll move to ODOT. Any thoughts?
I think it looks really good. We hear loud and clear the desire to really make sure that we are progressive in how we provide discounts to lower income and disadvantaged communities. And I think this captures that very well. I also think it captures well the desire to have the holistic look at the system, and the OTC has really been transitioning towards that perspective in our recent funding decisions, setting aside a new program for micro mobility projects, definitely investing in alternative transportation options, really seeing the need to, if we're going to reduce congestion and get people out of single occupancy vehicles, we're going to have to provide alternatives. So I think this message is consistent with the direction that the OTC is already going, and it will just help us continue in that vein.
That's, there's always more work ODOT can do, but like Commissioner Smith was saying, we've had the commission really leading the way here. There was a recent assessment of all the state policies on bike bike walk friendliness, and Oregon ranks second of all the states in the most bike-friendly transportation policies in the nation. So there's ways that we can, and that was done by, I forget the bike association group that did that assessment. And so I think for just a few of the things on what we've really appreciated from ODOT and working with EMAC through this are a few things that kind of evolved in this recommended action. One, where it's coupled with robust investments by ODOT and regional partners in that reliable emissions-reducing competitive range of transportation. That's a key thing for us because we know the needs are vast and great, and so by just relying on tolling solely to provide all those, it's kind of a impossible scenario, or you just have a toll rate that is drastically high, and then we have massive diversion and equity concerns. So we really appreciate that partnership language. We really appreciate getting clear about what types of diversion are kind of the bad types of diversion. So the freight, the long distance trips, we really see those. So we thank you for kind of joining us with that. And then the last piece, we had worked on that final bullet point, kind of to help try to improve the clarity, Michael, like you were saying, of that and what that means. And so that was, Commissioner Smith, myself, others, just working on clarifying there. So thanks for accepting some of those edits. I think that hopefully does provide that clarity.
Okay, any other comments? Anything pop up while we're having the discussion? Online. So I think then with the adjustment, either adding in the phrase regional congestion, that's what we're going to do.
Yeah, for those.
In the narrative.
In the narrative of that, yeah.
We'll add in the narrative regional congestion. That's the only change that we'll make to this recommended action. Let's go ahead and take a vote. So those that are in favor of recommended action number 1, congestion management, go ahead and raise your hand and say yay.
Yay.
Thank you. It looks like all the yays are all yays in the room. Did everyone raise their hand? I just want to double check. And members online, go ahead and raise your hand and say yay if you agree with recommended action number 1. Great, I see. Park, Amanda, Dwight.
Yay.
Commissioner Smith, I think, are you abstaining?
Well, I haven't really formally been part of the vote, so how about that?
And James, did I see, are you voting yay? Wonderful. Okay, I think it's unanimous. The yays have it. I can call vote for nay. Any nay? All right, the yays have it. We've passed. All right, great. Okay, we've moved through recommended action number 1. Thank you so much, Michael. All right, so let's go on and move on to revenue generation approach. And this will focus on recommended action number 2. And for this action, I'm going to pass the floor over to Eduardo. Walk us through it.
Yeah, thank you. Which camera should I look into? Camera 1 or camera? I'm just kidding. No,
Everywhere.
Thank you. Well, first I want to acknowledge just the monumental moment that we're experiencing here. We've been convening for almost 3 years, and I'm just so excited to see you in person. And those of you who are joining us online, I'm just glad that we're continuing that. And so the approach that I'm taking for how we develop this revenue generation approach recommendation, I just want to acknowledge the number of public comments that we have received. The survey results have also indicated that the affordability is the most important piece for members of the public. Like, that was the bottom line, what they're concerned about. And that's actually the reason why I decided to join, to bring that perspective of being a Southwest Washingtonian who works in the Portland metro region. I've been a service worker, I've been a renter, and now homeowner. So I kind of felt like I brought a whole perspective to the committee and tried to really emphasize the importance of having this conversation. So when we started, I think we were grouping affordability with like neighborhood safety or something like that. And we separated the conversations that led to more fruitful outcomes, I think, in the foundational statements and then now the recommendations. And we began to recognize that tolling won't create sufficient revenue to address all of the disparities and inequities that have been created by the transportation system and just government in general. And I think we have to be very cognizant of the role that previous committees and agencies have played in impacting people's lives. And so anyway, we shifted our approach more to an incremental approach, I think is how I would probably acknowledge it. We're recognizing that it's not going to probably be a giant investment that's going to change people's lives, but a step in the right direction. And let's see here. In some of our later conversations, we also began to include a fuller picture to acknowledge the middle income earners, so the people who potentially live comfortably but could be like paycheck to paycheck. And I think last time I mentioned, you know, if one of their children goes off to college, like that could really set them off. And it seems maybe to some people like a $2.50 or $5 toll isn't significant, but when people have to pay that and factor that into their budget, again, is where I go back to my own experiences living in the metro region, and just want to continue to acknowledge that. And I think these recommendations do that, where we obviously want to prioritize the lowest income earners, the most vulnerable in our community, but then where there is opportunity, also consider the impact on the middle income earners. So I think I will conclude there, and I don't know if I should read it because ODOT did make some changes, so I will hand it back to our facilitator.
You know what we can do, why don't we read it as is, because that's what people are familiar with, and then we'll have the discussion and talk about the changes.
Okay, yes, and just for the record, proposed changes, I heard you there. Proposed changes. Okay. Well, recommended action number 2 connects to foundational statements 1, 2, 3, and 7. For the approach to revenue generation, the Oregon Transportation Commission should pursue the following strategy. Pursue a large carve-out to provide the low-income discount credits or exemptions to address affordability impacts. And second, to inform the strategy for what is left over after bond finance multimodal capital investments, which includes mitigation, select a rate schedule that is optimal for managing demand. All right, that's it. I'm glad it wasn't as long as the last one.
Nice and tight. Thank you for that. So now Eduardo's given us an overview and read the as written recommended action. Now let's open it up for discussion, and we'll go in order. We'll hear from the members about what Eduardo said and the recommended action as written, and then we do actually have some comments from ODOT. I know Garrett shared that with us over online earlier, so we'll get to that very quickly. Okay. So members, any thoughts about recommended action number 2? Any changes to what you see that that's already the way it's written? Online, any thoughts about recommended action number 2? I'm hearing no comments right now. Oh.
And we have one from James.
James, please.
Go ahead, James.
Sorry, I was just trying to say that my audio is not very good. So I'm getting kind of choppy. So that's all I meant to push chat, not raise my hand. Sorry.
Okay, we'll try to speak up more so that, and go ahead and let us know in the chat if you need us to kind of up the volume for you, okay? Okay, great. So I'm hearing no comments from the committee members. So why don't we pass the floor to ODOT that has some proposed changes?
Yeah, definitely. Well, first I'll say, this has been awesome working with you all the last couple of months. This started out for revenue, very specific, and then trying to like communicate, we want X number of dollars for certain things. So one, I just want to say thank you for being able to like, gain some trust a little bit with ODOT, that we do have a decision-making process for getting there. EMAC is going to be with us along the way, and so we look forward to those future conversations and that kind of, like you're saying, more iterative approach, which I really think this is. And so when you sent the meeting materials out last Wednesday, I've been on my tour to ODOT and talked to probably 30 plus people who would be working on taking your direction and what we hope the OTC then would accept, and then actually implementing it. And so the edits that you're seeing here on the screen, and I'll walk through those here in a second, were really meant to help provide clarity to that implementing audience to understand what your intentions are for that. And so it really is meant to build them up and clarify it and not kind of change any kind of substantial structure or emphasis that you were willing to communicate. But again, that's going to be in your eyes to understand whether that was accomplished or not. So I'll walk through these, and then Commissioner Smith or Lucinda, feel free, I'll leave some space to add on to anything at the end. But the first one, so instead of targeting it, and I understand the large carve-out, we were trying to use the language of Daniel Porter and what we heard from the ODOT economist last month. We saw it more just speaking to, instead of trying to speak to a certain revenue decision, just say that we want ODOT to provide that substantial contribution, sort of working in tandem with that last bullet point on the previous recommended action to get to that system where more of the burden is spared by that middle or upper income household. This language we feel would give us that better direction. So it most likely and will be a decision as far as how much to carve out in the toll rate setting, but there's also other places within ODOT where money could come from to support this low-income program and the discount. And so I think to provide a substantial contribution, I even, just hearing back these were Lucinda's words, this provides us a larger direction, basically, to the ODOT infrastructure to help go search for those dollars, make sure that program is whole and meets the needs. So that's a lot of words to say. That's providing a substantial contribution, I feel, gives that better direction. And then the second piece of it here, I think folks were getting a little tripped.
Why don't we just talk
okay, sorry, yep.
That's good. So why don't we talk about this first proposed edit? And thank you, Garrett. That really brings us up to speed. What are your thoughts, members, about the proposed edit?
Well, as you were talking, Garrett, the first thing that kind of popped into my mind was that this new language does allow for the possibility of drawing funds from somewhere else, whereas pursuing a large carve-out makes it seem more restricted to just a single source of revenue. So that was, and I was actually thinking about that as you were talking and before you even mentioned that as a process, but I think it makes sense.
Okay.
Thank you for sort of explaining the piece about part of the toll program management would be, searching and programming, other pockets of funding to support, EMAC recommendations and then the whole system that we were talking about.
And I think a good example of that, even later down in your recommendations around community-based organization involvement, you saw, based on your feedback, the Innovative Mobility Program, we're able to take that from dollars that aren't tolling, just put that in place today. So that's a good example of how that search for dollars might end up.
You were going to go off mute.
No, I would just say substantial seems larger than large, so I think large is very relative.
Members online? Is that a thumbs up?
And I think Commissioner has a hand up.
So it sounds like, we'll move into the next point, but no other comments about it? Any challenges about maybe making this change before we take the vote? We're not going to vote right now, but it is anything to consider. Okay, great. Move on to the next one.
And Commissioner Smith, I saw your hand up briefly. Did you want to make a comment about this, or?
I was just going to kind of reiterate your point, which was, I think you and I talked about this language, and I was the one, I think, who wanted to use the term substantial contribution, recognizing that it doesn't always have to come out of the tolls themselves, but that we really are trying to make sure that we look at all buckets of money. So we don't have to increase toll rates. It's, that being sensitive that we need to keep rates reasonable, but we definitely need to provide those contributions. So that's all. And you said it way better than I just did.
Okay, so let's move on to the second proposed change.
Yeah, definitely. So what I heard from you all were kind of the key messages you wanted to communicate were at kind of the top and the bottom end of the waterfall. And it was the top end was the low income bucket that we just talked about. And the bottom end of the waterfall, I took from the message being, you want to choose a toll rate schedule that is optimal for managing demand at the end of that waterfall. And that you don't want ODOT to pursue a strategy where they try to maximize that final net toll revenue bucket, thus requiring higher toll rates. Because I think based on a little bit of that community engagement feedback and the voice of this committee is that, there's not a lot of existing trust with ODOT that they would use these additional dollars gained from a higher toll rate and reinvest in equitably and in a proper way. At least not at the start. Maybe ODOT can gain that credibility or accountability, but that's not there. So when I took this language around, I think, again, some of the, it might kind of ODOT finance implementation folks were a little, maybe it was the layman's terms of what is left over after these, they were having struggle with well, how could we institutionalize that? And so this was even then so the direction was, could we write this differently to be more clear? So it really was Chris, Jessica, and myself who were trying to do a better framing to Chris, I think you even said, would you explain this to your grandma? And so this even is a little wonky for my grandma, I know she's, but because it included some of the key terms I think we heard from you all were around mitigation and demand management. So those are a little more kind of technical terms, so we tried to weave in a simple message. So don't pursue a strategy that is focused on maximizing the net toll revenue with higher toll rates. So that's what we're hoping to accomplish, in that first communication. Instead, select a toll rate schedule that emphasizes demand management, equity advancement, and revenue generation. So that's kind of those three kind of pillar goals. We wanted to be clear, what are the capital investments. And so earlier in the we believe we are kind of the preamble for this. We talk about we know tolling and HB 2017 and these infrastructure projects are kind of the direction from the legislature. So that's what that's referencing. And so included in that payment for those capital projects, there's also mitigation that comes along with the project and the low-income toll program. So it's a lot wrapped up in there, but we wanted to make sure we weren't forgetting any of the elements you wanted to kind of point to or reference, but coming out attempting to kind of clarify the message that we were hearing from you all. So would love to know if that hit the mark, if it was provided more clarity, but this was an attempt at that.
Yeah, What do you guys think? Mark? Michael?
Thank you. I think it's getting really close to the mark. I think for, recognizing the piece about the Oregon legislature, identified multimodal capital investment. Like, to my knowledge, so far they've been mostly like highway infrastructure, investments that have been identified by the state legislature. So, I guess I'm just kind of curious about that piece, because the way we have it here, it highlights multimodal capital investments, which I think leaves the room for like the state could say, we need like, this transit improvement or bike improvement, et cetera. But that, hasn't quite happened yet. So I guess what I'm thinking is like, can we like, I like that emphasizing, demand management and equity advancement is there. Could we then say, and provide like sufficient revenue generation for the Oregon legislature, and that kind of would tier out that, we have our clear, like our demand management and equity advancement goals, and then it's like just following up on that would be that second piece. Does that track or make sense at all? I guess I'm just trying to like get at that piece that
I was curious, why did we add Oregon legislature in the bottom when it's above in the preamble? Just to be clear, and
just from my perspective, just to be clear, because before we had multimodal capital investments, which could be anything, right? Especially member of the public, like, well, that could be bike lanes, or, transit, BRT routes, whatever, right? Like, so I'm just saying, so it could mean a lot of different things. And so we're trying to get closer to, well, what are those capital investments that we're talking about? And also kind of giving a nod to sort of the baseline investment, sort of the reason why tolling has been kind of brought about to begin with, which is to pay for these baseline, Oregon legislature identified capital improvements. So that's the base, and so just making sure that we take care of that, as well as mitigation, and instead of this sort of like, okay, we're gonna put a higher toll rate to pay for a bunch of other goodies. So we want to try to get as much clarity on that as possible. But Michael, you raised some really good points. And so how do we make it even more clear? And also, it's not just about clarity, it's also about, do you agree with it, right? So part of the reason why we also wanted to spell this out a little bit more is to make sure that A, it's clear, and therefore B, we have concurrence, we have agreement. So you may or may not agree with where the sort of the philosophy of this is going, but that was the intent. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's really helpful. Because I guess, I'm just thinking about like I recognize the need for, the pieces, that ODOT and the Oregon legislature have laid out. So I guess, is there a way we can communicate that, but like not more than that? So like, so I guess really I just, it just comes back to like, is there a way to elevate demand management and equity advancement?
Mm-hmm.
And then, like, I feel like the next piece is like, something that's like I'm like understanding and coming along with, but to me, like, this is a real opportunity for demand management and equity advancement, and so it would be nice to see that as the priority as well. I know we've kind of gone back and forth on that.
Yeah, was it bulleted at one point or something? Was it like 1, 2, and 3, so it was really clear what the priority was, or
yeah.
am I forgetting?
I wonder, Michael, if we could do like that second sentence where it reads through, select a rate schedule that emphasizes demand management and equity advancement, comma, knowing that revenue will need to be generated for yada, yada, yada. Like, so it gives the nod to, like, we know we need to do this, but this is our message, that.
Yeah, that sufficient revenue will need to be, generated for those projects. Because you want to be able to manage demand, in an equitable way, and still be able to check that box of having sufficient funding for those projects. Otherwise, you just focus on the demand management piece, and you might not hit that mark. Is that okay with everybody, including ODOT and OTC and whatnot?
Well, I like the way you phrased it, because it's kind of nodding. Like, I feel like our values and things that we talked about in this group are really, I think, focused on demand management and equity and we recognize the other, the needs of the program.
Yeah.
Claire, that's awesome.
So right after, so instead, select a rate schedule that emphasizes demand management and equity advancement, comma, knowing that sufficient revenue generation is needed for, and then the rest.
And maybe instead of needed, maybe say required, because that is a legislature.
For ensuring.
Thing. It's not just needed, you have to do that, right?
Right. So, make that.
I mean, I would just suggest required, just to make it even.
Yeah.
I mean, that's true and it's clear.
James.
Yeah, James, you got your hand up?
Yes, thanks. On this, I've been trying to track with what you guys were saying in the room. So sorry if I'm redundant or anything, because I don't know, I can't hear that great. On that second bullet, I don't like starting with don't pursue a strategy. I just don't think that's I don't think that's good language to put into a recommendation. I think the recommendation should be I just don't like using don't. I like a recommendation that says, pursue a strategy that isn't focused on maximizing net tolls or something like that. I just think that language would have more legs. And then, and then the other piece was, as we talk about the revenue generation for the project piece, and I think it was Phil said something about, the something about required revenue or sufficient revenue. One of the things that I'm a little concerned with on that is on that revenue for those other projects, if we're going to say, like, we don't know what the price tag is on those projects, we don't know what the revenue from tolls is going to be. The revenue from tolls could be smaller than projected, and then therefore it wouldn't be, the only way to come up with the sufficient funding would mean the funds would have to come from other aspects of the tolling money. And so I don't know how you balance the use of the tolling revenue toward community and toward projects. I understand that there's also the mitigation of, emissions. But that's one piece that I think is kind of challenging on getting very specific about those projects and their importance, where I think that the language should be much more focused on the equity aspect and not as much focused on the projects, because we know those projects are coming, but that's not our purview, is those other projects. Our purview is on the equity aspects of the tolling. I hope that makes sense.
Two other things about what James is saying, that, I mean, ultimately, it sounds like he thinks it should be, once you take away the negative and start with more affirmative, and then also maybe elevating that it's, you know, focusing on equity and raising, I guess, the value and directing revenue to equity projects. Is that correct?
It almost sounds like striking out that last part on revenue generation, is what I heard, but.
I'm so sorry, Chris.
Oh, sorry. Well, James, were you suggesting striking that last part of the second sentence on revenue generation?
Yes, or reworking it or something of that nature. I don't have a solution.
Really good point that you raised about the, will enough revenues be generated for those projects to begin with? So that's.
Right, we get back to that why thing, so, I mean, I actually like that we're being honest with, this revenue has to accomplish multiple things. No one of those, and the first two would not have gotten a toll justified in this region based on the survey data from the beginning. So it's the project. The only thing that I keep thinking about is, when you had the legislature, and I forget exactly what was agreed to and what projects we're talking about, but I almost feel like there's the known projects and there's a future project. And the tolling is probably not going to James's point, is not going to be sufficient to pay for 100% of any of those projects. It's going to be used to pay for a portion. And the good news is the legislature is going to be there with other funding sources too. And folks who don't know this, like, it was good to stay bond funded because you can bond fund for decades, and that's how you actually pay for this stuff. It's not 5 years, it's 30 years. You know what I mean? So I'm not as worried about that, but I think if we eliminate that, we're not being honest that this is about demand management, equity, and infrastructure. Historically, the most expensive thing is infrastructure, but we're at least putting equity and demand management ahead of it.
Yeah. And I think the language of knowing is simply saying, we know that this is lurking there, but we're still focused on demand management and equity advancement. So I think that supports your point that we're being honest, we're acknowledging, and we know it, but that's it.
I'm feeling like we need to do a little bit more work on language here.
You want to, I typed something in the chat. Can you bring up the chat? That rephrase the openings to be the positive.
Okay.
And then kept the knowing piece in it.
And Jessica, we have Park, who's raised his hand as well.
Oh, you know what, Park, why don't you go, and then we'll read what Derek put in the chat.
I was going to suggest reversing the two sentences. I think the first one still has a point, but it's better to start with the select a rate schedule, and then a second sentence, don't pursue.
So you want to start with the second sentence and not with the first that says pursue a strategy?
Yes, drop the instead and make it a positive statement about what we want, and then follow with the don't pursue a strategy that is focused.
Well, the other way to do it, and wordsmithing is so easy to go into wordsmithing, right? But that first sentence could say something like, rather than pursuing a strategy that focuses on maximizing total revenue, the fact is select a rate. In other words, you kind of, it's both, essentially both are positive. Rather than do this instead.
Right.
Rather than don't do this.
Right. Right. So pursue a strategy.
So rather than pursuing a strategy, instead, select a rate that, blah, 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 blah.
Yes.
Right.
Yep. Beautiful.
So I kind of see you working over there, Garrett.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to jump to Amanda, who has some thoughts.
Thanks, Jessica. I was actually just typing into the chat. I'm with Park and James in that I think we should start with what we want, not what we don't want. And so and then I'm also with you, Phil, on the, I don't want to wordsmith by committee, but here we go. I think it should be, I agree that it should start with select a rate, schedule, yada, yada, yada. And then, however you want to transition about what we don't want, but I think we should start with what we do want.
Thank you, Amanda. So it looks like, Sarah, you've put this new updated version in the chat, and I'll read it for the members that are not online. Select a rate schedule that emphasizes demand management and equity advancement, knowing that revenue generation is needed for Oregon legislative identified multimodal capital investments and for mitigation of project impacts, including for the low-income program.
Repeat that again?
Yeah, I'll read it again. Select a rate schedule that emphasizes demand management and equity advancement, knowing that revenue generation is needed for Oregon legislative identified multimodal capital investments and for mitigation of project impacts, including for the low-income program. And then, are we keeping this at the bottom? Pursue a strategy that is not focused on maximizing net toll revenue with higher toll rates? Two sentences. So you guys online can kind of check it out in the chat. And then the rest of us, can you read that?
Yeah.
It's a little hard to read.
Well, I think the projector blurs half of the screen.
Yeah.
I think if you make the window a little smaller, it has to be a little bit.
Idea. So, I'm sorry, Eduardo?
Oh, is the second one proposing that we create 3 bullet points instead of 2? Is that what the break is?
So Lucifer, for breaking that up, yeah, so it would be 3 bullet points, right?
Yeah.
Select a rate schedule phrase, and then the pursue a strategy that is not focused on maximizing net toll revenue, higher toll.
But I think that last sentence is almost not quite pointless, but it's, I don't see how it
No longer
really.
necessary.
I mean, yeah, that's how I would read it. Oh, what was that whole thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's probably true, that it doesn't relate to the first part, but as its own bullet, it's probably okay. That way we're acknowledging what I'm leaning in so that people can hear me online. So that it captures what the public has been telling the committee, that they want the lowest toll possible. So again, just keeping it in the simplest terms, because the first statement is like, okay, here's your bureaucratic statement, and then the second one's like, okay, we're not going to pursue the highest toll inlet for the sake of generating more revenue. I don't know. Anyway, it's just acknowledging public comment.
And the way you said it actually right now was in the affirmative, which I think what James was requesting. It was something to the effect of pursue a toll rate that is as low as possible, or something along those lines, right? So I think there's probably a way that we can workshop that a little bit to hit it on the point that James was referring to.
How about if we do this? Why don't we, let's see if we're in the ballpark of where this needs to be, and maybe agree to maybe fine tune it a little bit more, because we're hoping to have one more subcommittee meeting before the July, before the documents have to go to the OTC.
Mm-hmm.
So, and if we can't have a meeting, we'll work with you all online. But it feels like, let's just agree, let's find out if we have yays on about 80% there with this new phrasing. So how many yays for 80% there with the new phrasing that's in the chat, those 2 separate phrases. So I'm going to count the yays now. We have all yays in the room, and I'm going to look for I see Amanda. Thank you, Amanda. I see Park and James. I see James. Am I missing anyone else? And I see a thumbs up from Commissioner Smith. All right, we're good to go. So we will fine tune this, but it looks like we're in the ballpark of where we need to be with recommended action number 2. So we were gonna take a break at 4:20. I want everybody to, stretch, get some water. Why don't we break for 10 minutes, and then we'll come back and we'll do the rest of our meeting. But everyone stretch, get some fresh air, hydrate, and for those of you online, we'll see you back here at 4:43. Okay?
Work. Thanks.
We've got lots of coffee, but no way to make it. I didn't think about that one.
Like public agencies. So that is like fun, right now? Like the foundation, and then from there, the work is the.
Can you hear me?
Like it, to work on like solid waste one day, and then the next day it's like parks and nature. And really bright.
If you can hear me a little better, we're trying to make some adjustments. Okay.
Go ahead.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Hope everyone had a good break. Stretch your legs, got hydrated. So I think with recommended action number 2, we're in agreement that we're just about there. So let's go ahead and move on to recommended action number 3. And my apologies. What's the next recommended action, Nicole?
I think it's 5.
We're going to move to recommended action number 5, and that's business investment. And for this action, we're going to turn it over to James, who's going to give us an overview of recommended action number 5.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming back to the table. Okay, I'm going to make this quick because I know we're short on time. Recommended action number 5, business investment. Identify and commit to a plan for increasing the number of small, minority, and women-owned businesses that are awarded contracts for design, build, and operation of the toll system and projects supported by toll revenues. I really tried to champion this because I think as we've talked about a lot of the community challenge of people who are experiencing low income, we also need to make sure that we don't forget about the small and growing businesses that are also going to be affected, nor do we want to lose focus on the fact that a lot of the work to bring the tolling system to fruition and to maintain that system, there's a lot of business opportunities there, and we want to see that a lot of those business opportunities, in fact, that there is a commitment that a lot of that business goes to small, minority, and women-owned businesses, because without that type of investment in those businesses that I talked about, I think we'd be missing a major piece of the equity in the whole tolling metaverse. Now, I just saw that on TV, the whole tolling infrastructure. So with this, we don't have a whole lot of bullets. It's all pretty much just straightforward. Questions?
Thank you very much, James, for that overview. So, and also, James has read off the recommended action number 5 as written. So now let's have a discussion about it. Members, any thoughts about this recommended action? Any changes, or is it sounding right? Does it feel like it's ready to go?
I have a question. So do we mean small minority or small women or emerging small businesses? Those are different things. So for example, Oregon's a small business state, so just ensuring small business participation does not at all mean women or minority businesses would be on the project.
Good clarification. What are your thoughts, James?
Well, my thoughts are that the emphasis needs to be on minority and women-owned, but on the small emerging businesses, I also think that there's room at the table for them, because the equity, we need to make sure that as we talk about equity, it's equity for all. And I think that when we look at the small and emerging businesses, that those businesses also need to be included in the conversation.
I think I have a comment, yeah. I think I would prefer to keep the focus on minority and women-owned, looking at it through a lens of when the most vulnerable in our community are set up to thrive and prosper, then everyone else has more success. I'll conclude my comment there.
Okay.
I guess I'm thinking about how I would like, change it, but I'm supportive of the spirit of it.
So I guess the question is, do you want the emphasis to be on minority and women-owned businesses and small or emerging small businesses? Or do you want to just keep it on minority and women-owned businesses?
Well, I think the language here is consistent with what we have defined as our equity community. And so to that extent, then I think this is on point. We haven't really addressed emerging businesses and, how is that defined? Where is that in our equity framework? That kind of thing. So I think just for consistency's sake, I would probably just stick with this.
Stick with the current phrasing.
We define our equity community as small business.
They're included in the equity framework. We call it, that it's called out as far as, yeah.
I worry that I think people thought we meant small minority, or maybe folks don't know, and it's just part of my job that I do know, like, the majority of businesses in Oregon are small, white-owned businesses.
Mm-hmm.
So by putting it there, and in our region, we're talking about thousands versus hundreds of the other two categories. So if you don't actually put goals, which I know we can't put in numbers, then it's really, you're not doing anything. Like it's because they have equal access. It's not equity, which we already know that kind of stuff. So to me, it's sort of, in Oregon, the vast majority of minority and women-owned businesses are actually small. So we could use the words like disadvantaged business, which are both small, generally more minority, and maybe that's a better way to describe the goals for increased participation. Because disadvantaged business are income level, and generally in Oregon, and the state certifies this, are mostly people of color businesses.
John, I think you're absolutely right on that. That is the specifics that we need to get down to, because we are not, I agree with just what you said there, as far as we need to be able to have a more concise definition of small, and I think disadvantaged is a better descriptor, given that this example doesn't get into the details of defining each of those categories like you've done. But I think disadvantaged would be the easy fix to this statement.
I mean, enough in recommendation 4, we actually use the acronym DBE, so disadvantaged business enterprise. So, that's
something very specific.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I was going to actually ask John, like, what are the specific certifications for your agency and that you're representing in other agencies in the region that where there are goals set, right, like 15% or whatnot. And the question would be is like, what is ODOT's existing baseline requirement for projects? Is there one? Is it across the board? Does it vary depending from one project or the other? And how does that compare with, some of the other agencies in the area? And so, whether it's like DBE or what's the other one, women
and minority.
Minority owned. So there's these different certifications that have, different requirements. There's SBE too, right? Which, small business enterprise, which is different also. So, perhaps that might be a next step is to get into greater specifics for this recommendation moving forward.
So Eduardo, because you had a comment, what would you think about adding DBE?
Yeah, it's
and
more,
switching it out for
yeah,
small?
it's more specific.
Okay.
I would be supportive of that. Thank you for shining a light on that, John, and like bringing greater clarity. I think that the DBE piece.
You'd like
really
that add?
helpful, yeah.
Okay. So, Onion or Izzy, what are your thoughts?
It makes sense. Something when I wasn't thinking about when we're reading the word small, and just like, oh yeah, small businesses. But John was saying that's just such a broad net considering where we are in the state, so I totally support DBE.
Okay.
Yeah, same. I agree. I think it's good to be specific. 'Cause, yeah, thanks for sharing that knowledge.
Yeah, and I hope that people understand, we won't be excluding anybody by not including small. Like, if anything, it's still gonna be a challenge for the state to increase utilization beyond 10 or 20 or even 30% of those categories.
So what's the language gonna sound?
It goes to the majority firms.
So what will the language sound like?
Well, so it sounds like what we're gonna do is, we're gonna switch out the word small for a disadvantaged business enterprise,
Okay.
minority, and women-owned businesses. That,
Yeah.
so,
Okay.
so the clarification of really what the intention of small was. So I just wanna look online, are there any other hands raised here? Art, you have a comment?
Yeah, I support the DBE, but I also wanted to point out, this isn't talking about the percentage of money. It's says increase the number. It's just different than talking about 15% or whatever.
Park, and I think that's a great point, because to what has been said on the DBE, and there are very specific requirements, and ODOT and others probably already have certain goals. And since we don't have that, I mean, we could make a bullet point and say, hey, we want you to, commit to these goals or what have you, but we don't know what those goals are. So we're not able to bullet those things out, because I like a measure as much as anybody, but I just don't know that we'd be able to really pull measures together in time to pull this recommendation together for the OTC.
And I just want to build on that. That's the part from ODOT. So we got the presentation from Amber Ontiveros last month.
That's right.
And I think for us, it won't be like a specific measure for this. We support, because it provides that kind of strategy and direction, because you saw from what Amber was presenting, we're still working on kind of identifying those different percentages or goals or targets, not just for like tolling operations, but the project tolling and funding as well. That's where, I think we land with this, and the language that Amber was using, and where we're kind of setting our targets are on the disadvantaged business enterprises. So that would gel well with kind of, how we would execute the strategy.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah.
And so Commissioner Smith, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think, it makes sense that we get the language where we want it. And the OTC has definitely been committing to trying to increase DBE, minority, and women-owned business contracting. We've got the required amounts, but we're trying to go above and beyond that. And that's why we, have consultants like Amber, and we have a, equity assistant director. So it's a goal that we're pursuing already, and I think it will be well received.
Thank you. So why don't any other comments about this recommended action? Okay, hearing none, let's go ahead and read the revised or the updated action that's being proposed. Identify and commit to a plan for increasing the number of disadvantaged business enterprises, minority and women-owned businesses that are awarded contracts for designing, building, and operating the toll system and projects supported by toll revenues. So we'll switch the word small to disadvantaged business enterprises. So those that want to vote yay on this changed recommended action, let's go ahead and count the yays for the updated recommended action number 5. Okay. I see everyone except for John. I'm going to come back to that.
Well, James said something, and it just occurred to me, he's right. So it's not about the number of contracts, it's about the dollars spent. So that's what you're really trying to increase. And again, because you're a disadvantaged business or a small business, you can only be so big so that the numbers are gonna come. So what we should probably be saying is identify and commit to a plan for increasing the percentage of dollars spent on these three types of businesses as part of these projects.
Okay,
That's what
okay.
you're, because then it's a relative percentage. 100 million, 20 million, that's a good percentage.
So, members, did you hear that? So the ad is increase the dollar spent or the money spent on the number of of disadvantaged business enterprises, minority, and women-owned businesses. That's the ad.
Repeat that.
So,
It's in the chat as well.
Yes, oh.
oh, can you read the chat? I can read it out loud.
The percentage of dollars spent, yes.
So we'll pull back. Let's go back. How many people are voting yay for the now updated recommended action number 5, that really increasing the percentage of dollars spent on DBE businesses, minority and women-owned businesses, and then the rest of the phrase is the same. So let's see if we have yays in the room. How many yays? Okay, great. We have full yays in the room. And how about online? Any thumbs up? Amanda, Mark, great. And James? Okay. Awesome. I think we're good to go on recommended action number 5. Well done. Thank you, John. And thank you, James. And thank you, everyone, for that conversation. So let's move on to recommended action number 6. So this is business investment, and for this action, I'm going to turn the floor over to Izzy.
Good to see everybody in person and on Zoom. Kind of give some background on how we got to this one. This one's kind of based on community-based organizations. And so in the beginning, the first recommendations, we did a larger carve-out of lower tolls, especially communities that are lower income. We thought about like the end of that waterfall, like revenue that is left over. How do we continue to serve communities and minimize harm, negative impacts, and provide resources and tools with potential revenue that's available after the tolls. And so I think that kind of started with trust and understanding there's been historical distrust in government agencies, ODOT being one of them. And so we're thinking that, there's a lot of groups and organizations already on the ground, working with community members, community organizations, try to speak up to as well, sorry, and supporting some of the work that's already being done in and around transportation. So a lot of the groups in here provide transportation for individuals, van pools, car sharing, and how do we provide opportunities to expand that work and have a bigger impact, and also continue to be responsive. It's easier to steer a smaller ship, sorry for the ship reference, than it is like a large barge like ODOT, and be more responsive quickly. And so a lot of CBOs that are on the ground work in communities and with communities and have an understanding. So providing them with those resources to continue that work and expand it, I think was really important. And also we talked about how do we get community members informed and engaged. Some of the surveys show that there's different levels of being informed when it comes to tolling. So providing resources as well to get community members informed of the process and involved when it comes to tolling planning, community engagement as well too. So that's kind of how we came to some of these recommendations in our actions. I guess I'll just go ahead and read those. So once tolls are in place and EMAX work is complete, ODOT and OTC should, wrong one, sorry, number 6. Provide ongoing funding for community-based organizations, CBOs, that serve communities identified in the Oregon Toll Program's equity framework that are impacted by tolling to support the following types of activities. CBO transportation services for carpool, van pool, and other transportation programs, building upon the concept of ODOT's newly created innovative mobility program. Compensation for community members to participate in tolling-related transportation planning activities, projects, and committees. Toll education programs and ongoing engagement to inform the toll program. Increase enrollment in the Oregon Toll Program account holders and access to low-income toll program. And lastly, include CBOs in the monitoring process to identify and help prioritize actions to address neighborhood health and safety issues caused by increased diversion of freight or longer trips from tolling.
Wonderful. Thank you, Izzy. So Izzy's given us an overview, and then we read through the exact recommended action number 6. Let's go ahead and have any thoughts from you members about recommended action number 6. How's it sitting with you? The language. Spent a lot of time talking about what the investment with community-based organizations looks like, and we've gotten more specific about it. And I think there also was the desire to leave the flexibility for CBOs to weigh in on how they want to participate. I see hand up here.
Yeah, James.
James.
Hi. Well, I'm a big proponent of engaging CBOs in this work for sure. But it was kind of interesting as we look at that survey information that was presented at the beginning of the meeting, where funding to CBOs got, like, if I can remember, like 14% support. So considerably small. And then I know when I had a chance with Phil and some others to meet with some CBO leaders. You know, they were really much more focused on funding going to reducing the cost of tolling and less around programs and so forth. And I don't know that they had a full understanding of some of the things that we've moved forward here, but I just wanted to make sure that we capture that because this is a, you know, CBOs have been a big piece of one of the areas of potential funding. And so it's a little gray area to me at this point right now.
An excellent point, James. And actually, Fabian and, you know, Phil, you were a part of those conversations. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't have any articulated thoughts at the moment, but I think that, you know, there will be a need for a lot of the education on it. And so I think that's the way that I'm seeing how we can plug in community-based organizations. But yeah, I think the question is, like, you know, we will need to start with, you know, first providing those resources and that information so then we can go out into the communities. But yeah, I think it's really up to the organizations to decide what that's going to be and how they want to introduce it, if at all they want to be a part of it.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Nothing else to add.
So really, there still is a sentiment that we support funds going to CBOs to create this education that's needed and all, you know, bridging the gaps with the communities, especially the targeted communities. That's the purpose of the program. So, James, does that assuage or
Yeah, it does, because I think the one of the lenses that we need to look at this is right now people are reacting, tolling, bad, don't like it, make it less. If we start talking 5-10 years out after people have had tolling for a while, it's going to be much more about, hey, what are you doing with the money? And so let's not, like, lose ourselves in the short term on a very long-term foundational project. So I think that the language that we have here is what we need to put in place for long-term success.
I think James did raise a good point, though, that the extent of those conversations with CBOs were probably at a very beginning stage. And so it makes me wonder whether we want to be if we want to open up the sort of the realm of potential contributions from CBOs from, like, this is a definitive list, which it kind of makes it seem like in terms of how it's structured right now, versus, you know, these are examples of the kind of things that CBOs could do. The other thing in response to James is a really good comment about the amount of support that we saw in the survey. it wasn't exactly clear in the survey what kind of add value the CBOs would be providing. I wonder if the community were to see the kind of contributions listed here and that clarity, if there would be a different response. And also the understanding that, quite frankly, I mean, just to be, fully honest here, CBOs provide a really good bang for the buck in the provision of these kind of outreach services and whatnot, as compared to sort of, traditional consulting firms and even government agencies. So, that's an education process that, maybe needs to be had at some point too with the community. But
Well, I mean, maybe the language could be something as simple as, that are impacted by tolling to support the following types of activities, but not make it, there's a way of phrasing that just says, including, but, what's the phrase that says, this and other possibilities?
Right.
So in other words, leave it open that there's more that could be added to that list than just what's listed here.
And I know that we were trying to do that until it's that are impacted by the following types of activities as an example. So we want to maybe change that.
But there could be a phrase after that, that says, including but not excluding, well,
Right, I know that.
Yeah, including but not limited to, that's right, yeah.
Would you want to add that?
Yeah, that's fine. I just want to note for the record that the biggest piece for me here is what I see as the technical assistance to the community, where it says increase enrollment in the Oregon toll program, account holders and access to low-income toll program. That's just based from my experience helping people sign up for the low-income fare program that TriMet offers. I just wanted to state for the record that is the most important piece to me. The other edits, I'm fine with. I'll toe the line on that.
Mark.
Yes, I don't think we want to open it up too far. That we've got the and other transportation programs, which is pretty broad, but I think we purposely restricted it to transportation in not saying we're commenting upon all the other things that CBOs do. Education and medicine and whatever. So I like the language as it stands.
Okay.
I just quickly, from what I heard from ODOT around implementation of this, I think one of the things, because you're right, we've been working on this language for a couple months now, because we've heard, what it's been. And so I think the list here, I thought, landed in a really good place with folks. They're like, okay, we can understand these different services and where it might fall, and how we would be able to support that with funding and involve CBOs in those different activities. So I don't think it's you got your bullet points here, don't come back to us again. I don't think it's like a preclusionary list, just even as it's not being interpreted that way as it's listed here. So if you wanted to add the including but not limited to, that's fine. I think the way it's written here does, the succinctness and the clarity of it is actually really helpful for the ODOT folks, but that's just some thoughts on it.
Or you could say, to support the following transportation-related activities, including but not limited to.
So maybe if you look under, second bullet, compensation, at the end of that, if you said project committees and other future related project needs, then you have that's a big open-ended, because we don't know what the future.
Right.
That's, to me, the limited to is a little bit more jargon, but that one's wait, you said there's space here for future needs that we won't be around, other groups will be there?
Well, and it's not our prerogative anyway.
Right. I don't know, it's a workaround.
Yeah, and I was just thinking about I think part of my hope in some of the discussions around this, and I don't know how clear it needs to show up, but my hope is that by supporting the transportation activities and CEOs through educational programs that that they can help people enroll in a low income toll program, but that they can also, you know, help provide, you know, the information and encouragement to access other transportation options as well. And so I, you know, just thinking about like, you know, yes, helping, you know, access the toll system, but also, you know, if there's other barriers that people are facing, and if it's getting a low-income club card, or, you know, just understanding what, you know, bike or route options they have too. Like, I think there's that holistic transportation piece that I hope a CBO could, you know, put into their programming as well. So maybe that just kind of ties in some of the language about, like, you know, supporting transportation, or really like supporting mobility, right? Sorry, I said a lot of things there. I'm not sure. Make it really condensed. But what, I guess, what if we did put in, like, you know, a support mobility, or like just support transportation programming, that could then include some of those additional options there.
So, maybe do the add of put, in the top phrase, at the second sentence, the Oregon toll programs, equity framework, and that are impacted by tolling to support the following transportation types of activities.
Yeah.
That's the ad that you're suggesting? Or is that?
Yeah, I had suggested that a minute ago. Yeah, which
Yeah,
may,
right, so.
yeah, which may address that, yeah.
So we could add that for clarification, and then is that, if there was another point, does that bring us back to, get us to where we want to go? And I know, how would that fit with ODOT, that change?
I don't think I see a structural change in like the effect of it, like, because the bullet points are listing out the activities where y'all would want it all. Yeah.
So do we want to add that, members, or do we want that clarity?
I mean, I think it does provide clarity. It's more specific. It sort of suggests that all of the other bullet points are in some way related to transportation or transportation impacts.
Right.
So we're not going to go off, you know, far afield.
So Park, how does that fit with you? Because you didn't really want to change it, but it adds a clarity level.
I'm going to wait till I understand the complete change, which I assume we'll get to.
Okay, all right. So maybe we'll just type up that phrase and we'll put that in the chat. So it sounds like that's the only change that we really want for this recommended action. Is right? Yeah, it's good. Yeah. Feel on Finland. How do you feel, Izzy? This was.
No, I understand like Park's concern about, what is it, which bullet point, about limited to transportation, because it could go very broad net, and there's like accountability concern about that. So maybe if we do put that in that first, you know, following types of transportation activities, that might help clarify it as well too. So, but one thing I got.
Would you be okay with that addition of, okay. And Fabian?
Yeah.
Yeah. Michael, is that?
I was thinking about the phrase, like, including these things but not limited to, like, yeah, I guess would we still see that as an option then? Because I just feel like, you know, as, you know, as I was working with CBOs, like, if there, like, you know, just transportation needs that are emerging, and like for them to have the capacity to inform how, like, I just don't want this list to be like limited, right. But this is really our suggestion of like where we would imagine it going.
So if we had said including but not limited to without transportation related preceding it, then that would have opened up the possibility that we would be getting into areas that aren't transportation related, and I think that's to Park's point. Right. If we say transportation related activities including but not limited to, means that there are other potential transportation projects or things that we haven't thought about and that may come down the pike that could still be included, but maybe included at a later time.
I see, Commissioner Smith, I saw you had your hand up. Do you want to jump in?
Well, I was just going to say that I didn't feel that the language was very limiting, but I'm comfortable if you wanted to change it exactly the way it was just articulated, which is to support following type transportation-related activities, including but not limited to. But that's fine. But to me, when you say the word support the following types of activities, that leaves it open for other types of activities. So I'm not sure that it is critical, but I think it's fine.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Smith. Members, do we want to do the two adds, adding the support the following transportation types of activities, including but not limited to? And Garrett kindly provided in the chat, provide ongoing funding for community-based organizations that serve communities identified in the Oregon Toll Program's equity framework and that are impacted by tolling to support the following transportation-related activities, including but are not limited to, and then the list of activities. So we're proposing that we modify recommendation action number 6 with the following change phrasing. The additions are transportation-related activities and including but are not limited to. Okay, and Commissioner Smith says take away the word are,
Yes.
but not limited to. Thank you. I was thinking the attorney might weigh in. Thank you for that. So with those changes, let's go ahead and take a vote. Who are the yays with the updated recommended action number 6 with the changes? Great, we have consensus in the room. And now I'd like to see the members online. Great. Park, Commissioner Smith, James. And did Amanda have to leave us?
Yeah, she has to drop.
Okay, all right. I think that passes. Thank you so much, everyone. Got it, our recommendation, action number 6. Now let's move on to the last recommendations. There's 2 of them in accountability, and for that, I'm going to pass it over to Phil.
And Jessica, excuse me, I just want to do a courtesy time check. It's 5:23.
Yes. My apologies. Everything has run over. Do people have another, 10 minutes to stay?
Got the reception at 6:30.
If anybody signed up.
That's a good idea. That's a great idea. Are there members of the public?
Oh, yeah.
Yes. So we've got a couple members of the public that have raised their hands. Do we want to go ahead and switch to public comment, Jessica?
Yes, let's take,
Okay.
we'll take public comment first, and then we'll move on to accountability.
All right. So we've got on the screen the instructions for public comment. You'll have up to 2 minutes to speak. We will put up a timer on the screen whenever you're ready. And we ask that members of the public, if you'd like to speak, please raise your virtual hand so we can unmute you when you raise your hand. And first up, looks like we have Dean, who's had his hand raised. So Dean, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. You should get a notification on your side where you can unmute yourself, and then you'll be able to speak. Go ahead.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, excellent. My name is Dean Sir. I'm president of Vote Before Tolls Committee, a PAC in support of IP4 and IP41, and I'm also president of Vote Before Tolls Foundation at votebeforetolls.org. We're working to change the dialogue in the Constitution via the initiative petition process to, are we the voters in support of a new tax in the form of a toll? And if so, how will those funds be used? So there's an overlap in what we're working on and what you're working on. We know that the state legislator is the instigator of this tolling effort, but ODOT is a huge beneficiary if the tolls do anything beyond just, as you all said earlier in the meeting, just manage demand by adding capacity. This started out as congestion tolling. During meeting number 17, it was reframed as congestion and revenue. And clearly in today's meeting, number 19, it's revenue and non-congestion highway projects are also part of that. So ODOT already benefits from fuel taxes, the state income tax, the weight mile trucker taxes. In addition to this new tolling tax, is also actively implementing a per mile tax. It's ironic that our President Biden, is talking about a federal fuel tax holiday, while ODOT is talking about a new tax that is orders of magnitude higher per mile. And just an observation, and I'll jump into some specific feedback. You all are celebrating a 2-year anniversary, but you've acknowledged there's a lot of community lack of knowledge and understanding, even after several years of working on this. Some specific feedback. On the survey, the structure is very biased in how the questions are answered and how you either have only a limited number of choices, and I appreciate that for statistical purposes, but it drives you down a particular way of thinking. I think it's important when you look at survey results, you look at the questions and the flow, not just the summarized responses. If, for example, how do you prefer to allocate non-highway toll revenues? I know somebody's identified this. 39% said none of the above. They probably saw non-highway, but 35% said transit improvements. Maybe those people missed the non in the question and assumed that capacity was part of that option for improvements. So note that the drivers and not riders
Dean?
currently paying. Yes, sir.
Hi. Sorry, you're a little over your 2 minutes. Can you please move towards wrapping your comment up so we can get to the other public commenters?
Absolutely. I'll send in written comments. I appreciate the opportunity to speak, and I do appreciate the work that you're doing. I have one quick observation on, I think it was number 5. It seems like your equity target in number 5, which was the disadvantaged businesses, minorities, and women, isn't exactly the same equity target you use in a lot of the rest of your discussions. You might want to take a few minutes to think about that, but I'll send the rest of the comments by email. Thank you all.
Thanks, Dean. All right. And are there any other members of the public that would like to make a comment? All right. Paul Edgar, I'm going to go ahead and, Paul, did you want to make a comment? If so, okay. I'm going to go ahead and give you permission to talk. You should be able to unmute yourself. Go ahead, Paul Edgar.
Thank you, everyone, for what you're doing. What's important, however, with this tolling is the inequity that it will result in the regional area immediately around the I-205 impact area. So this reduction in activity will hurt the economy. It will divert in massive ways. We do not have parallel routes. And so we could have a degree of diversion and rerouting that has never been seen before, and it will impact businesses and cities. The old Oregon City West Lynn Bridge, a historic bridge, will see massive rerouted traffic across it just to not pay a toll. And in doing so, it will flood the downtown of Oregon City, killing business activity, killing the activities that, or the trips that would run on 43 and 99E McLaughlin. So this activity, this diversion, could wipe out Oregon City and some areas of Clackamas County in a manner that has no equity. And And this equity question is very important and should be considered, because if you hurt businesses and reroute traffic onto unsafe roads, this will result in greater number of accidents and have a massive reduction in public safety. And if that is not considered in your equity, you're making a mistake. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate your comment. The next commenter we have is Rob. Rob, I'm going to give you the ability to unmute yourself. So go ahead whenever you're ready.
I hope you can hear me. I have been, there we go, maybe. I have
We can hear
had
you.
a so-so connection throughout the meeting. Jessica has been very difficult to understand while others have been crystal clear. I'm a concerned resident of West Lynn. Over the past months, I and others have posed questions to you that have not been clearly, directly answered, such as, in the context of the I-205 expansion, what is equity? Where specifically are these claimed disadvantaged communities? Gladstone, Milwaukee, Lake Oswego, where? Why have you time and time again ignored the overwhelming opposition to tolling? Where is the big demand for it outside of government? How will tolls be returned to the toll payers when the goals are not met? Another one, why have you considered recommending to OTC that the tolling of I-205 not be dropped or put to a vote of the taxpayers? EMAC appears to consist only of pro-tollers. There is barely a scintilla of opposition. You are totally failing in your objectives of engaging residents that will be affected by your tolls. You are listening, but not hearing. Oregon contributes less than 0.05% of global atmospheric pollution. Your minuscule reduction in VMT will do nothing to reduce that, but it will devastate businesses in the I-205 corridor if your proposals come to fruition. Transit ridership has plummeted. Why are you pushing that? I could go on, but my time is up. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. All right. And with that, unless there are any other members of the public who would like to make a comment, I think we've reached the end of our public comment period, so we can get back to the presentation.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that, Nick. I just want to remind, a friendly reminder that the Equity and Mobility Advisory Committee has been charged with defining equitable processes and outcomes for the tolling program. They are an advisory committee with no decision-making authority about whether or not to toll or not. And it has been my experience that the members of this committee listen attentively and care very much about all public comment. So with that said, I just want to let everyone know about the role that this committee has, and that is to advise on how to create an equitable tolling program should there be tolling. Okay, with that, let's get back to our conversation about recommended action, and I'll hand it over to Phil to talk about accountability.
Yeah, great segue. Accountability couldn't come at a better time. Yeah, so really, in reality, recommendations 3 and 4, which are about accountability, are essentially kind of a capstone of our work. And it's worth going back to the beginning to really understand why accountability is important. And of course, you know, at the very beginning, we essentially established the equity framework. We thought about equitable processes and outcomes using a trauma-informed perspective as a guide star. And central to that perspective was the acknowledgement of past injustice, empowering communities that had been historically underserved, committing to collaborate differently, and engaging in meaningful dialogue, all with the goals of being transparent and gaining trust. So, we've gone over a whole bunch of robust recommendations today, and we understand that managing tolls and realizing their impacts will constantly evolve over time, requiring reevaluation and adjustments. And so the question is, how will impacted communities really know that their voices will continue to be heard as conditions change, and that benefits of tolling are truly happening? So that's really what accountability is all about. So this is an area of work that requires ongoing engagement and inclusion at the decision-making level. So other ODOT committees have functioned with time-limited engagements, but management of tolling requires a different and an ongoing process. So recommendations 3 and 4 essentially deal with that in two different ways. The first, number 3, is dealing with the Rules Advisory Committee, and number 4 is actually dealing with essentially the outcomes or what we want to see happen. So maybe we'll just go over that one by one. So recommendation action 3 reads, to center equity in the important rulemaking and I-205 toll project rate setting process, the following elements should be included. 1, include an EMAC member on the RAC. 2, RAC should include enough people with lived or professional experience with equity, as defined by the equity framework, to avoid tokenism and marginalizing their voices. And then 3, EMAC should be provided with the investment-grade traffic and revenue analysis information and be given the opportunity to give feedback directly to RAC before they make a recommendation to the OTC.
Wonderful. Thank you, Phil. And I know we're really over time, but let's have a tight discussion about this recommended action. Members, do you have any comments about the recommended action as written? We know that ODOT has some.
Yeah.
Do we want to just launch into that unless any members have any comments about the recommended action as written? Looking online. Okay. Let's hand the floor over to Garrett and let's talk about the proposed change.
Yeah, and definitely this was not to discount or wouldn't be opposed to the tokenism language being included, but just in what ODOT's seen before and kind of the reaction when I brought this around was that, of course, we should be doing that and easily surpassing the tokenism bar. And so there was really a desire to see this written more kind of aspirationally, and so this is kind of a take at thinking it probably more that positive framing piece of it, or the more aspiration piece. So including people with that experience of equity, anchoring back to the Oregon Toll Program's equity framework, and providing them with the necessary support to effectively and meaningfully participate in committee decision-making. So that, again, this is, I'd probably say one of two ways. If it's really important that the call out to not have that be tokenism or marginalized voices, wouldn't be opposed to keeping that. Would love to see also this additional piece of kind of what's that more positive framing, or what are we aspiring to do?
What do you think, Phil, about the?
Well, I had responded to Jessica and Garrett a little earlier when I first saw that, and I mean, to me personally, it's not a deal breaker, but I think it is important, especially in the context of our trauma-informed perspective, that there be some explicit acknowledgement of the fact that tokenism is not what we are trying to create, even if it's by accident.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, and to acknowledge that, I think, is actually a positive thing, because it's saying we know that this happened historically and in the past, and we're not doing that here. And so I think as as a combination, that's a very positive a path to embark on. Now, yeah, the word tokenism has a very negative connotation, but I think in the context, it's not the overall statement is not negative. Now, there are other ways, I think, of also suggesting that without necessarily using that word. And so I think we were standering about the idea of just saying like a robust number of people, you know, which sort of gets beyond the fact that there might just be one or two. So there are other ways of massaging that.
Thoughts, members?
I'm fairly indifferent. I mean, I can go either way. You know, I don't. It's really more about the product after the fact. And so I, if nothing else, I do like the language about supporting the individuals no matter what. Without that, it doesn't matter who's there and what they look like.
I think the second part of it is good.
And so if we want to kind of punt this a little bit to that subgroup where we can work on the massaging and keeping the, like calling out what we don't want, you know, because historically and how equities worked in committees is that you have, like, we have the two equity voices and then we have the, you know, so I think it is, that's not even that, like, old historical of a practice. It's still one that I think is pretty common today in how, you know, government committees work. So, yeah, I think we can workshop a way of, like, calling that out, but then also, you know, picking up some language like this and kind of what we're aspiring.
Any thoughts from members online? So I think that sounds like a great idea. Why don't we take a vote with the idea that we're going to refine this language in the sub-team meeting that's going to follow, but we'll bump up the aspirational piece and modify it so that it maybe includes this phrasing or something slightly different. So let's take a vote on that. How many yays for modifying it to be a little bit more aspirational, including this phrasing, or a little bit slightly different based on what the sub-team comes up with? So yay for modifying this recommended action number 3 in the sub-team, refining that.
We're getting yes from Park and James online.
Thank you, Park, and Commissioner Smith and James. Okay, all right, good. So let's move on to the next recommended action and our last.
Now, that's really long. Do you want me to read the whole thing?
You do not need to read it.
Huh?
Let's save some time, because I think everyone knows.
Yeah.
Why don't you just give us an overview?
Well, I'll just say that, you know, again, number 4 is dealing with the idea of another committee separate from RAC that would be responsible for reviewing and essentially overseeing and making sure that the benefits and that all that we've talked about actually happen. And so that's a separate body from the Rules Advisory Committee itself. So that committee, which would monitor, evaluate, and provide feedback, would be looking at equity commitments made to address EMAC's core intent, the equity commitments made as part of mitigation, enrollment in and economic impacts of the low-income toll program, the DBE commitments, and improving ODOT's approach in general to equitable engagement and customer service.
Members, how is this sounding? Does this feel like this recommended action is good to go?
Sounds great.
Head nod, sounds good. Members online? Thumbs up? Awesome. Want to go ahead and take the vote?
Sure.
Okay, so let's go ahead and let's vote on this. As written, good to go. How many yays on recommended action number 4? We'll count the yays. We have unanimous in the room, got unanimous, great, and then Commissioner Smith, okay.
And of course, we put 3 and 4 last because we were reversing the original order. That's how these appear.
That's right, and actually, yeah, thank you for that, the added note. So we're going to move the accountability piece to the last part of the recommended action, because it really is the last piece, right? These actions are, what's the follow-on, what happens when tolling is in operation? So is everybody on board with that, with moving accountability to the last part? Head nod? Yep. Is that a head nod? I see a stretch from James. Okay, all right. So we're done. This is great. Bravo, everyone.
99% done.
Yeah, 90% done, yeah. We're 90% done. We'll do a little bit more refinement in the sub-team meeting that will be before the OTC meeting to kind of wrap up that, those couple of changes that we've talked about in recommended action number 3. But other than that, you've unanimously approved your 6 recommended actions. This is 2.5 years of work, so bravo.
It's simple.
All right, so we're over time, but we did want to just give everyone a little bit of space to say what this process has meant to them and what it's meant to be on EMAC and to be a part of this committee. 2.5 years of work. This is groundbreaking work that you've been doing. So we just want to, if you have any thoughts, those of you online or in the room, we'd love to hear from you. What has it meant to be a part of EMAC for 2+ years?
Well, it's been a great learning experience for me, and it's unfortunate that we're all meeting in person at the very end, because I think it certainly would have been an interesting dynamic if we've been meeting in person along the entire journey. But I think, personally, I think the expertise, the relationships, the way we've communicated with each other has been phenomenal, even over Zoom. And I think that's something that's really been pretty enriching for me.
Thank you.
I'd say ODOT, in my opinion, gets a lot of negative press, especially historical. But I think you guys put together a fantastic team, both the staff and the organizations and the facilitation. And we do some of this work smaller scale at TriMet, and this is so much work. Like, create these documents, to do this research, to get 12,000 people to respond to you, especially on a hot button issue that we heard tonight, still isn't resolved. But I think it's been fair-minded and very transparent. And I've learned a lot too, just in watching the different professionals in the room and the members of the committee and how you both work. So.
And I really want to appreciate the rich discussion. I feel like, whatever the topic was, there was just so much engagement and commitment and, added meeting times and just trying to review so many documents. So thank you to the team for, putting it all together and then, providing it to us. I'm definitely someone who process things by reading, and so that has been really helpful. So thank you very much for all of that, all of the hard work, and to fellow committee members too. Learned a lot here.
I see Commissioner Smith and Lucinda, but we can start with Commissioner Smith.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank everybody on the committee and staff who did a fabulous job. The amount of time that the committee members have spent on this topic is incredible, and I've learned a lot. I still have lots to learn, but I have appreciated getting to understand the perspectives that everybody brings to the table, and I think going forward it will really inform how this process moves forward in an equitable way, and I'm really proud of the work that you all did, and thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh, cool. I want to echo my thanks too. I remember when we first convened, I kept saying, wow, what a great group. and what are they going to come up with? And you guys have actually hit it out the ballpark. You tried to hit every aspect of equity, and that's an incredible thing to do. So I just want to say thank you for all your hard work. Thank you for putting like your passion into what you're doing, not just your work, but your passion. So thank you so much. Appreciate all the work.
Yeah, for me, it was also, I think, a learning experience, and I think I really appreciate like all the work that the team has done in making it easier to engage and recommend and provide feedback. And yeah, I think towards the end it was a little difficult to track me down, so appreciate Jessica's efforts and Nick and MJ and really making it easy for me to participate.
Yeah, I really appreciate the deep dives. It wasn't just superficial. There's so much that can be not covered in these meetings, so having those outside meetings, some more time to actually give the time that's needed, I really appreciated, because these things require time and energy, so really appreciate everybody putting that into and realizing that's important, so.
I have to hand it to Garrett, who I think, Garrett's walked a pretty fine line, essentially walking a tightrope between, this committee and ODOT and basically every other committee in the region, which has weighed in on tolling. That's no easy task to do and come out of it alive. So hats off to you.
Thank you. Yeah, and I just wanted to say, I'll echo some of the thoughts of the people that put many hours of their lives into this. I was hired on by Lucinda in November a couple of years ago, and I don't think I'm maybe a typical DOT employee, and so that was great. I come from the education and housing world, so this has been absolutely my favorite part of the job, is working with this committee and seeing that centered. But it's been a great joy. I mean, I'm looking to my friend here to the right, Nicole McDermott, who has put in, she really is the coordinator and the glue that keeps all this together. So she is awesome to work with. And then the wonderful Jessica Stanton and Christine beforehand, who helped kind of steward us through all this. Because in no way do we end up with the committee and the relationships and the dynamics, like you were saying, Phil, over Zoom without Jessica and Christine beforehand. So just supported by an awesome team, and love to work with these people every day.
I give the members online, Park, James. Muted?
Mark, I think you were muted.
Yeah, I think you were muted. We didn't get to hear your comments.
I'm sorry, the space bar works sometimes and doesn't work sometimes. I just echo everything that everyone has said, and that it's been such a good group to work with. Usually in a committee like this, there's one or two difficult people, and there just weren't any in this whole group. So it's been a wonderful experience.
Well, anyone have anything else to say? I just want to thank all of you. You've been an amazing part of my life this past year. It's been an honor to work with each one of you and to get to know you. It's an incredible committee. You all mean so much to me. Thank you, and this work is amazing, and I'm looking forward to seeing how it plays forward and what we do next, and I'm also looking forward to that meeting on July that we've been building up to for 2+ years. I think with that, we're going to conclude our, oh, we've got one more.
Oh, just about the loan control report, but go ahead. Before we end the meeting, I just want to talk about that real quick.
Okay, yeah. I'm going to pass it over to you.
Okay, we didn't get to walk through some of the, options for the low-income toll report. I think what we'll do is we'll commit to having, like a public-facing webinar in the next week or two, because we're planning to have, we gave to you sort of the excerpt of some of the high kind of key messages that are gonna come out of the low-income toll report, the draft. But the full report itself, we're working on getting packaged and sent out and getting posted to the website next week. So, let's just have, we'll call you back for another like hour, to do kind of a deep dive, and that way members of the public as well can get to comment upon and kind of see that, report going out. So that's the only thing I want to say.
No, thank you for that, Garrett.
Yep.
So we will follow up on the loan control report. We'll do that in a next meeting, and we'll make it a public meeting. We're looking forward to taking that deep dive. All right, always so much business to do with EMAC. With that, I just want to say thank you again to everyone. This has been an amazing experience, and there's more to come. Thank you for those of you joining online, and my apologies for all the technical difficulties and the listening, but you hung in there, so we really appreciate it. We're missing you in the room, but you know, we'll see you when we can. We hope that everyone has a great evening and enjoys the summer. It's a beautiful day in Portland. I think with that, we'll conclude. Thank you so much.